Welcome, welcome, brothers and sisters. Something went wrong. I had the wrong image, so that's why I had to quit the live broadcast a few minutes ago. But we restart, and welcome to a new paper, which is paper 82. And paper 82 will learn us and tell us more about the evolution of marriage. The first three topics I will read through are the mating instinct, the restrictive taboos, and early marriage mores. So let us see, learn, hear, and read what the Urantia book tells us about the evolution of marriage today and tomorrow and maybe the day after, because I think it were 9 chapters. So let us start. And here, screen share so people can read along with me. We are still in the third book of the Urantia book, which is all about the history of Urantia. We are now at paper 82, the evolution of marriage. Marriage, mating, grows out of bisexuality. Marriage is man's reactional adjustment to such bisexuality, while the family life is the sum total resulting from all such evolutionary and adaptive adjustments. Marriage is enduring. It is not inherent in biologic evolution, but it is the basis of all social evolution and is therefore certain of continued existence in some form. Marriage has given mankind the home, and the home is the crowning glory of the whole long and arduous evolutionary struggle. While religious, social, and educational institutions are all essential to the survival of cultural civilization, the family is the master civilizer. A child learns most of the essentials of life from his family and the neighbors. And then we speak in terms and times of no computers, no tablets, no mobile phones, and whatsoever distractive devices, uh, because nowadays children are not learning that much anymore due to all the artificial distractions of all these devices. A child learns most of the essential of life from his family and the neighbors. The humans of olden times did not possess a very rich social civilization, but as they had, they faithfully and effectively passed on to the next generation. And you should recognize that most of these civilizations of the past continued to evolve with a bare minimum of other institutional influences, because the home was effectively functioning. Today, the human race possesses a rich social and cultural heritage, and it should be wisely and effectively passed on to succeeding generations. The family as an educational institution must be maintained. And then section 1, the mating instinct. Notwithstanding the personality gulf between men and women, the sex urge is sufficient to ensure their coming together for the reproduction of the species. This instinct operated effectively long before humans experienced much of what was later called love, devotion, and marital loyalty. Mating is an innate propensity, and marriage is its evolutionary social repercussion. Sex interest and desire were not dominating passions in primitive peoples. They simply took them for granted. The entire reproductive experience was free from imaginative embellishment. The all absorbing sex passion of the more highly civilized peoples is chiefly due to the race mixtures, especially where the evolutionary nature has been stimulated by the associative imagination and beauty appreciation of the Nodites and the Adamites. But this endite inheritance, and endite means he who has the life plasm of the first human father in him, her, and the first human father is Andon. But this endite inheritance was absorbed by the evolutionary races in such limited amounts as to fail to provide sufficient self-control for the animal passions thus quickened and aroused by the endowment of keener sex consciousness and stronger mating urges of the evolutionary races. The red man had the highest sex code. The regulation of sex in relation to marriage indicates 1. The relative progress of civilization. Civilization has increasingly demanded that sex be gratified in useful channels and in accordance with the mores. And second, the amount of endite stock in any people. Among such groups, sex has become expressive of both the highest and the lowest in both the physical and emotional natures. The Sangik races had normal animal passion, but they displayed little imagination or appreciation of the beauty and physical attractiveness of the opposite sex. And the Sangik races are the races who carried the 6 colors, which are the red race, the orange race, the yellow race, the green race, the blue race, and the indigo race. The green and the orange are not in physical form anymore, but they are still present in our DNA. So these are the Sangik races, each member of a family of the Andon and Fonta family line. One day there was a family that got born 6 children, each with a different coloration. As soon as they were exposed to the sun, their skin brought a specific color forth. So that's why they are called Sangik races. What is called sex appeal is virtually absent even in present-day primitive races. These unmixed peoples have a definite mating instinct but insufficient sex attraction to create serious problems requiring social control. The mating instinct is one of the dominant physical driving forces of human beings. It is the one emotion which, in the disguise of individual gratification, effectively tricks selfish men into putting race welfare and perpetuation high above individual ease and personal freedom from responsibility. As an institution, marriage from its early beginnings down to modern times pictures the social evolution of the biologic propensity for self-perpetuation. The perpetuation of the evolving human species is made certain by the presence of this racial mating impulse, an urge which is loosely called sex attraction. This great biologic urge becomes the impulse hub for all sorts of associated instincts, emotions, and usages: physical, intellectual, moral, and social. With the savage, the food supply was the impelling motivation, but when civilization ensures plentiful food, the sex urge many times becomes a dominant impulse and therefore ever stands in need of social regulation. In animals, instinctive periodicity checks the mating propensity, but since man is so largely a self-controlled being, sex desire is not altogether periodic. Therefore, does it become necessary for society to impose self-control upon the individual. No human emotion or impulse, when unbridled and overindulged, can produce so much harm and sorrow as this powerful sex urge. Intelligent submission of this impulse to the regulations of society is the supreme test of the actuality of any civilization. Self-control, more and more self-control, is the ever-increasing demand of advancing mankind. Secrecy, insincerity, and hypocrisy may obscure sex problems, but they do not provide solutions, nor do they advance ethics. Section 2: The restrictive taboos. The story of the evolution of marriage is simply the history of sex control through the pressure of social, religious, and civil restrictions. Nature hardly recognizes individuals. It takes no cognizance of so-called morals. It is only and exclusively interested in the reproduction of the species. Nature compellingly insists on reproduction, but indifferently leaves the consequential problems to be solved by society, thus creating an ever-present and major problem for evolutionary mankind. This social conflict consists in the unending war between basic instincts and evolving ethics. Among the early races, there was little or no regulation of the relations of the sexes. Because of this sex license, no prostitution existed. Today, the Pygmies and other backward groups have no marriage institution. A study of these peoples reveals the simple mating customs followed by primitive races. But all ancient peoples should always be studied and judged in the light of the moral standards of the Moors of their own times. And know that in actuality, if everything would have gone in a normal way, if this world would not have this suffering of the planetary rebellion, the Lucifer rebellion and the planetary rebellion due to the betrayal of the former planetary prince Caligustia, and if Adam and Eve did not had any default, then all these primitive races that we know of today would not exist anymore. They would all have been progressed into a far more modern society. But due to all the backlashes and setbacks which happened during the Lucifer rebellion and the betrayal of our former planetary prince Caligustia, we are having still these primitive people here in this world. But all ancient peoples should always be studied and judged in the light of the moral standards of the Moors of their own times. Free love, however, has never been in good standing above the scale of rank savagery. The moment societal groups began to form marriage codes and marital restrictions began to develop. Mating has thus progressed through a multitude of transitions from a state of almost complete sex license to the 20th century standards of relatively complete sex restriction. In the earliest stages of tribal development, the mores and restrictive taboos were very crude, but they did keep the sexes apart. This favored quiet order and industry. And the long evolution of marriage and the home had begun. The sex customs of dress, adornment, and religious practices had their origin in these early taboos, which defined the range of sex liberties and thus eventually created concepts of vice, crime, and sin. But it was long the practice to suspend all sex regulations on high festival days, especially May Day. Women have always been subject to more restrictive taboos than men. The early Moors granted the same degree of sex liberty to unmarried women as to men. But it has always been required of wives that they be faithfully to their husbands. Primitive marriage did not much curtail man's sex liberties, but it did render further sex license taboo to the wife. Married women have always borne some mark which set them apart as a class by themselves, such as hairdress, clothing, veil, seclusion, ornamentation, and rings. And then the last section for today of this paper, 82, which is all about the evolution of marriage. Section 3, titled Early Marriage Moors. Marriage is the institutional response of the social organism to the ever-present biologic tension of man's unremitting urge to reproduction, self-propagation. Mating is universally natural, and as society evolved from the simple to the complex, there was a corresponding evolution of the mating mores, the genesis of the marital institution. Wherever social evolution has progressed to the stage at which mores are generated, marriage will be found as an evolving institution. There always have been and always will be two distinct realms of marriage: the mores, the laws regulating the external aspects of mating, and the otherwise secret and personal relations of men and women. Always has the individual been rebellious against the sex regulations imposed by society, and this is the reason for this age-long sex problem. Self-maintenance is individual, but is carried on by the group. Self-perpetuation is social, but is secured by individual impulse. The Moors, when respected, have ample power to restrain and control the sex urge, as has been shown among all races. Marriage standards have always been a true indicator of the current power of the Moors and the functional integrity of the civil government. But the early sex and mating mores were a mass of inconsistent and crude regulations. Parents, children, relatives, and society all had conflicting interests in the marriage regulations. But in spite of all this, those races which exalted and practiced marriage naturally evolved to higher levels and survived in increased numbers. In primitive times, marriage was the prize of social standing. The possession of a wife was a badge of distinction. The savage looked upon his wedding day as marking his entrance upon responsibility and manhood. In one age, marriage has been looked upon as a social duty, in another as a religious obligation, and in still another as a political requirement to provide citizens for the state. And probably the Western civilization is in the last one. Many early tribes required feasts. Many early tribes required feats of stealing as a qualification for marriage. Later people substituted for such raiding forays athletic contests and competitive games. The winners in these contests were awarded the first prize, choice of the season's brides. And in some sports, this is still happening in one way, shape, or form. Among the headhunters, a youth might not marry until he possessed at least one head. Although such skulls were sometimes purchasable, as the buying of wives declined, they were won by riddle contests, a practice that still survives among many groups of the black man. With advancing civilization, certain tribes put the severe marriage tests of male endurance in the hands of the women. They thus were able to favor the man of their choice. These marriage tests embraced skill in hunting, fighting, and ability to provide for a family. The groom was long required to enter the bride's family for at least 1 year, there to live and labor and prove that he was worthy of the wife he sought. The qualifications of a wife were the ability to perform hard work and to bear children. She was required to execute a certain piece of agricultural work within a given time. And if she had borne a child before marriage, she was all the more valuable. Her fertility was thus assured. The fact that ancient peoples regarded it as a disgrace or even a sin not to be married explains the origin of child marriages, since one must be married. The earlier, the better. It was also a general belief that unmarried persons could not enter spirit land, and this was a further incentive to child marriages, even at birth and sometimes before birth, contingent upon sex. The ancients believed that even the dead must be married. The original matchmakers were employed to negotiate marriages for deceased, and deceased I mean individuals. One parent would arrange for these intermediaries to effect the marriage of a dead son with a dead daughter of another family. Among later peoples, puberty was the common age of marriage, but this has advanced in direct proportion to the progress of civilization. Early in um, social evolution, peculiar and celibate orders of both men and women arose. They were started and maintained by individuals more or less lacking normal sex urge. Many tribes allowed members of the ruling group to have sex relations with the bride just before she was to be given to her husband. Each of these men would give the girl a present, and this was the origin of the custom of giving wedding presents. So now we know where all this comes from and stems from. Among some groups, it was expected that a young man would earn her dowry, which consisted of the presents received in reward for her sex service in the bride's exhibition hall. Some tribes married the young men to the widows and older women, and then when they were subsequently left widowers, would allow them to marry the young girls, thus ensuring, as they expressed it, that both parents would not be fools, as they conceived would be the case if two youths were allowed to mate. Other tribes limited mating to similar age groups. It was the limitation of marriage to certain age groups that first gave origin to ideas of incest. In India, there are even now no age restrictions on marriage. Under certain Moors, widowhood was greatly to be feared, widows being either killed or allowed to commit suicide on their husbands' graves, for they were supposed to go over into spirit land with their spouses. The surviving widow was almost invariably blamed for her husband's death. Some tribes burned them alive. If a widow continued to live, her life was one of continuous mourning and unbearable social restriction, since remarriage was generally disapproved. In olden days, many practices now regarded as immoral were encouraged. Primitive wives not infrequently took great pride in their husbands' affairs with other women. Chastity, Chastity in girls was a great hindrance to marriage. The bearing of a child before marriage greatly increased a girl's desirability as a wife, since the man was sure of having a fertile companion. Many primitive tribes sanctioned trial marriage until the woman became pregnant, when the regular marriage ceremony would be performed. Among other groups, the wedding was not celebrated until the first child was born. If a wife was barren, she had to be redeemed by her parents, and the marriage was annulled. The Moors demands and demanded that every pair have children. These primitive trial marriages were entirely free from all semblance of license. They were simply sincere tests of fecundity. The contracting individuals married permanently just as soon as fertility was established. When modern couples marry with the thought of convenient divorce in the background of their minds, if they are not wholly pleased with their married life, they are in reality entering upon a form of trial marriage, and one that is far beneath the status of the honest adventures of their less civilized ancestors. And with this said, I have come to the end of reading the first three sections of paper 82, again, which was all about the evolution of marriage. We have been given a lot of background information today, and I would say please re-listen and reread this information, and ponder upon it, and ask the help of the Holy Spirit to get more in-depth understanding of this information. All right, thank you so much for listening and reading along with me. I wish you all a beautiful, joyful day,